I had just merged onto Highway 71 when my phone rang. It was Maria, crying so hard she could barely speak. "Ma'am," she whispered. "Don't go home. Pull over and check the cameras." My hands tightened on the wheel. "What happened? Please. Just look." There are moments when your body knows danger before your mind does. Mine did just now. I took the next exit and pulled into the parking lot of a closed barbecue place, stopping under a faded sign still promising fresh brisket. My in-laws had been at Austin Airport only 20 minutes earlier, smiling beside their matching blue suitcases, supposedly flying to Seattle for an Alaskan cruise. My mother-in-law, Judith, had hugged me longer than usual before they left. "Take care of yourself, Rachel," she'd said. At the time, I thought she was just being warm. I was 44, a captain in the United States Army, stationed at Fort Cavazos. 22 years had taught me how to stay calm when plans fell apart. I had handled broken convoys, missing supplies, young soldiers crying on the phone with bad news. But sitting in that lot with my phone in my hand, I felt like I had forgotten how to breathe. I opened the security app. The front porch camera showed nothing. The kitchen, nothing. Then I tapped the living room feed. My husband, Daniel, stood by the couch with his arms around another woman's waist. He kissed her slowly, comfortably, like it wasn't the first time. She wore my cream cardigan, the one I kept folded in the hallway closet because the house was always cold. A half-empty bottle of wine sat on the table, the good Cabernet my battalion commander had given me after our last inspection. He'd opened it for her. I watched without moving. The woman laughed and touched his face. Daniel smiled at her the way he hadn't smiled at me in years. My phone slipped from my hand. I caught it before it hit the floor. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a strap around it and pulled hard. I had sat through enemy fire drills that scared me less than that small screen. I called Maria back. "Where are you?" "In the laundry room. I came back for my blood pressure pills." I heard voices. "Can they see me?" "No." "Leave through the garage. Take only your purse." She hesitated. "Mrs. Morgan, I'm so sorry." "Maria, this is not your fault." My voice came out steady, even though nothing else in me felt steady at all. I saved the clip to my phone and emailed myself a copy. Training was already taking over. Preserve the evidence. Confirm the facts. Don't rush into a bad situation. Just as I reached for the ignition, movement flickered on the screen. A blue suitcase rolled into frame, the very one I'd watched my mother-in-law wheel through the airport doors. Then Judith stepped into my living room, laughing. For a second I told myself it had to be an old recording. Maybe the camera had glitched. Maybe I was just tired. Then I saw the timestamp. 11:47 a.m. live. Judith set her suitcase beside the couch while Daniel wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Well," Judith said, grinning, "I honestly thought she'd insist on walking us all the way to security." Daniel shrugged. "She never questions family." My stomach dropped, not from the affair anymore, but because all three of them were laughing together. Maria had been right to be afraid. This wasn't some secret Daniel was hiding. His parents knew. Maybe they'd always known. I forced myself to keep watching instead of reacting. Panic makes people careless. Patience lets you see the whole battlefield. Judith glanced toward the dining room. "Did Maria leave?" "I think so," Daniel said. "She cleaned this morning." The other woman frowned. "You're sure she didn't see me?" Daniel waved a hand. "She's 61. She barely notices anything." I almost laughed. Maria had probably noticed more about my marriage than I ever had. I called her again. "I'm driving," she whispered. "I'm so sorry," I said. "You don't owe me an apology. I should have told you sooner." "Sooner?" A long silence. "I've seen that woman before," she finally said. I closed my eyes. "How many times?" Maybe 6. That number hit harder than the kiss. Not one mistake. A routine. You never saw anything wrong? No. Mr. Morgan always said she was a client. But today your mother-in-law hugged her. There was no introduction. They already knew each other. That tiny detail hurt more than anything so far. Judith hadn't discovered the affair by accident. She had welcomed it. I replayed the footage from the start, studying the whole room this time instead of just Daniel. 3 coffee cups. A fresh bakery box from Shipley Donuts. Someone had planned this morning carefully. Another camera showed the driveway. At 11:39 a.m., a black SUV pulled in, no rideshare, no airport shuttle. Harold opened the trunk. Instead of luggage for a 2-week cruise, only 2 small carry-on bags sat inside. The big blue suitcase had been empty the whole time. A prop. They had never planned to leave Texas. I zoomed in until the picture blurred. Harold shook Daniel's hand, then hugged the other woman, not politely, but like family. A memory surfaced. 3 months earlier, Judith had canceled Sunday dinner for a weekend in Waco. Daniel had skipped church that same morning for a client meeting. Had they all been together? How many holidays had really been secret? How many times had I walked into a room right after everyone stopped talking? My phone buzzed. Daniel, hope your drive back is safe. Love you. I typed back, just left Austin. See you tonight. Sounds good, he replied, smiling as he sent it, on camera, seconds before kissing the other woman again. Then Judith walked over carrying a thick manila envelope. Written across the front in black marker was one word. Attorney. I sat there for 10 more minutes without starting the engine, the July sun beating through the windshield. Around me, ordinary life kept moving, a retired couple loading an RV, a father buckling his granddaughter into a truck. Mine had quietly fallen apart. I called my battalion executive officer. Sir, this is Captain Morgan. I'm running into a family emergency. I'll make the briefing remotely, if that's all right. You've never asked for special treatment. Take care of your family. I hung up and called Linda Brooks, a divorce attorney a fellow officer had once recommended. The receptionist said Linda was booked solid. It's urgent, I said. My husband doesn't know I've discovered something. 30 seconds later, Miss Brooks can see you at 2. I drove toward Austin instead of home. Linda's office overlooked Lady Bird Lake. She was in her 60s, calm, and carried herself like someone who'd seen every kind of divorce imaginable. She watched the footage without reacting, until the manila envelope appeared. She leaned forward. Pause it. Zoom in. They're organized, she said. You mean the affair? No. I mean whatever they're planning. That sentence landed harder than I expected. She handed me a legal pad. Think like an investigator now. Not like a wife. That one stung. Together we built a timeline. When had Daniel started working late? When had our bank statements stopped coming by mail? When had Judith suddenly wanted to help organize our finances? 6 months earlier, Daniel had pushed us to paperless billing, less clutter, he'd said. Judith had offered to keep copies of our house documents in her fireproof safe, just in case. At the time it sounded thoughtful. Now it looked calculated. Before I left, Linda gave one instruction. Don't confront anyone. If they're preparing for divorce, they'll expect anger. What they won't expect is a patient woman quietly collecting evidence. Driving home, I stopped at an H-E-B and barely tasted my coffee. Daniel called. How's the drive? Fine. Mom and Dad just landed. Landed already? Yeah, flight was early. The lie came so naturally. No hesitation at all. Back in the truck, I reopened the driveway footage. 11:39, my in-laws walked into my house. 11:52, Daniel texted that they were boarding. 2 hours later, he said they'd landed in Seattle. 3 impossible stories. 1 very confident liar. If he could lie this easily about something I could check, what else had he hidden? That evening, logging into our joint investment account for the first time in months, I found my answer. Nearly $186,000 was gone, not all at once, but in small transfers over 8 months, each labeled something bland like portfolio adjustment. If I hadn't been looking, I never would have noticed. I took screenshots of everything, then sat at the kitchen table listening to Daniel hum in the shower upstairs. An hour earlier he'd kissed my forehead and asked about grilled salmon. I had smiled and said that sounded nice. The words had tasted like cardboard. I kept staring at the numbers on my laptop screen long after I should have closed it. $186,000 was not a small mistake. It was not one bad decision made late at night. Someone had planned it, month after month, quietly moving pieces around while I was hundreds of miles away teaching young soldiers how to trust each other. The man upstairs, humming some song under the water, had been doing math against me the whole time. For 18 years I'd believed I knew this man. Now I wasn't sure I ever had. The next morning, before reporting to Fort Cavazos, I drove back to Linda's office. Today, she said, we collect facts. Feelings can wait. We spent 3 hours through every account, checking, savings, retirement, even our niece's nursing school fund. Has Daniel always handled the finances? Linda asked. Mostly. I trusted him completely. That's common. She turned her screen toward me. Bell County property records showed 3 properties, our home, a rental house, and a lake cabin outside Burnett. We don't own a cabin, I said. No. But Daniel did. He'd transferred it to his mother for $1, 6 weeks earlier. $1? I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. You don't sell a lake house for $1. No, Linda said. You hide it. That afternoon I met Maria at a cafe in Harker Heights. She looked exhausted. I keep wondering if I should have said something months ago. You told me the moment you were sure. I suspected before that. She looked down. I've worked for your family 10 years. You've worked for me, I said gently. Her eyes filled with tears. I couldn't betray you. You didn't. For the first time in 2 days I felt something besides anger, gratitude. Without Maria, I'd still be living inside Daniel's illusion. Life on base went on as usual, formation, staff meetings, readiness reports. One afternoon a lieutenant complained about a late supply shipment, and I found myself thinking how strange it was that one part of my life was collapsing while the other expected me to talk fuel inventories. Somehow that routine helped. The Army didn't care about my marriage. It just expected me to do my job, and I still could. Friday evening, Linda called. Good news and bad. Daniel intends to file for divorce. But he's chosen his timing, he's waiting until after your 6-week deployment to Fort Irwin next month. A chill ran through me. He wanted me hundreds of miles away while he emptied our life, thinking distance would leave me too overwhelmed to fight. Rachel, Linda said, I don't think he realizes you've already changed the game. Neither had I, until that moment. But I intended to. For 2 weeks I lived 2 lives. At home, I smiled over dinner, folded laundry beside Daniel, watched Old Blue Bloods reruns, even let him hold my hand, not because I'd forgiven him, but because I needed him to keep believing I knew nothing. During the day, I quietly built a timeline with Linda, every receipt, every property record, every lie, like fitting together a puzzle with no picture on the box. One Thursday, Linda called while I was eating lunch outside headquarters. I think I found what they've really been hiding. Worse than the affair. At her office, folders covered the table. She pushed one toward me, a sworn statement Daniel had filed while refinancing a business loan. My wife is frequently absent due to military obligations and has effectively abandoned the marital relationship. I never abandoned him, I said. I know. Both your deployments were under 9 months. Daniel had claimed he ran the household alone, that I'd chosen the army over family, that he'd expected our marriage to end years ago. None of it was true. My eyes burned, not from wanting to cry, but from realizing how long he'd been quietly rewriting our whole story. That evening I sat quietly in our church in Killeen. Pastor Allen noticed my face. "Everything all right?" I asked instead, "Has Daniel ever talked to you about our marriage?" He hesitated, then sighed. "He told me military life had changed you. That you were never home. He asked us to pray you'd find your way back to your family." Those words landed harder than I expected, not because strangers believed them, but because people I respected had been praying over a problem that never existed. Daniel hadn't just lied to me. He'd lied about me. The next morning, Linda called again. "Remember the lake cabin? I found where some of the missing money went." Over $140,000 had paid for renovations, a new dock, a remodeled kitchen, custom furniture, all invoiced before ownership quietly transferred to Judith. So I helped pay for a house that isn't even mine anymore. Exactly. For a moment anger nearly won. I wanted to drive home and throw his clothes on the lawn. Instead I remembered something an old first sergeant once told me: never move before you understand the whole battlefield. That weekend Daniel suggested a family barbecue once his parents returned from their vacation. The word almost made me laugh. "They've missed you," he said. "I'm sure they have. Mom says you've been distant lately." "Has she?" I looked him straight in the eyes. He nodded without a trace of guilt, kissed my forehead, and walked into the kitchen. A minute later my phone buzzed. "Linda, we found someone willing to talk. And it's not who you think." I had no idea the person about to change everything wasn't Daniel's accountant. It was the woman he'd risked our marriage for. I expected his mistress to slam the door in my face. Instead she answered with one tired sentence. "I've been wondering when you'd find me." Her name was Emily Carter, 38, a pharmaceutical sales rep from Waco. Nothing like the woman I'd imagined, she sounded exhausted. We met in Linda's office. Emily stopped a few feet from me. "I'm sorry." No excuses, just 2 words. "You knew he was married?" I asked. "Yes. But I didn't know he was still your husband. He told me the divorce was finished last winter." She set printed emails on the table. He'd told her I refused to sign the papers, that I'd moved on to the base permanently, that we hadn't shared a bedroom in 3 years. Each lie felt smaller than the last, not because it mattered less, but because Daniel had told so many he could no longer keep track of which version belonged to which woman. "I asked him once why he still wore his ring," Emily said. "What did he say?" "That taking it off would cause problems with clients." I laughed, the first real one in weeks. That sounds exactly like Daniel. Emily managed a small, tired smile back, and for a moment the room felt a little less heavy. Neither of us said it out loud, but something had shifted between us. We were not friends. We were probably never going to be friends. But we were no longer strangers circling each other with suspicion either. We were 2 women who had both trusted the same careful liar, and neither of us had known the other existed. Linda asked careful questions. The relationship had begun 11 months earlier. Emily had met Daniel's parents several times, introduced, she admitted, as the woman he'd marry after the divorce. There it was. Judith and Harold hadn't just tolerated the affair. They'd encouraged it. "They invited me to Thanksgiving," Emily said. "I'd spent that week at Fort Bliss helping with flood relief. Daniel told me his parents wanted a small, quiet holiday. Instead they'd celebrated with her." Strangely, I stopped seeing Emily as my enemy. She'd believed a different set of lies than I had. We weren't competitors, we'd both been manipulated by the same man. "Would you testify?" Linda asked her. Emily stared out the window for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes. Yesterday I found out he proposed to another woman." She laughed bitterly. Guess neither of us was the only one. For the first time, Daniel's controlled world showed a real crack. He hadn't betrayed one woman, he'd been juggling three, and none of them knew about the others. Rachel, Linda said afterward, I've handled divorce cases for 32 years. I've never seen someone destroy his own case this thoroughly. By early August, Linda scheduled Daniel's deposition. Say as little as possible, she told me. In a plain downtown conference room, Daniel walked in wearing his navy sport coat, the one I'd bought him for our 15th anniversary. Rachel. You look good. I've been sleeping better. His attorney began with routine questions, all rehearsed and smooth. Then Linda stood. Mr. Morgan, when did your relationship with Emily Carter begin? I don't know anyone by that name. Linda slid across a photo, Daniel and Emily hand in hand at a farmer's market, 10 months old. Then dinner at a steakhouse. A weekend at Lake Travis. Daniel kissing Emily outside a hotel. She's a business acquaintance, he tried. While telling her your divorce was already finalized? I never said that. Linda played a recording. Emily's voice, Daniel told me the divorce was finished before Christmas. Then Daniel's own voice, I know. I just haven't taken the ring off yet. The room went silent. Did you transfer the Burnett cabin to your mother? Yes. It was a gift. For $1? Were marital funds used to renovate it? I don't recall. Linda handed him 6 signed invoices totaling over $140,000. I don't recall, he repeated. Then Linda asked, how many romantic relationships were you involved in this past year? My private life isn't relevant. It is today. He glanced at me, then his attorney. 1. The door opened. Emily walked in. Daniel went white. Which one of us were you planning to marry? She asked calmly. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. You told me Rachel was gone, Emily said, then turned to me. I'm sorry. Back to Daniel, and last week I learned you proposed to another woman in Dallas. His attorney dropped his pen. Daniel finally whispered, but there was nothing left to say. The man who always had an explanation had run out of lies. The hearing came in early September at the Bell County Courthouse in Belton. I woke before dawn and put on my Army service uniform with the same care I used for promotions, every ribbon, every crease straight, not to impress anyone, but because that uniform stood for something Daniel had tried to destroy. You ready? Linda asked outside. As ready as I'll ever be. You don't have to win every argument. You only have to tell the truth. Inside, Daniel sat confident beside his attorney. Judith wouldn't look at me. Harold gave a brief nod, then lowered his eyes. Judge Eleanor Watkins entered at 9 sharp, silver-haired, calm, and clearly used to hearing why nobody's bad decisions were really their fault. Maria testified first, terrified but honest. When Daniel's attorney suggested she'd misunderstood what she saw, she said quietly, I cleaned that house every week for 10 years. I know the difference between greeting someone and kissing them. A few people in the gallery smiled. Emily testified next, admitting her mistakes without excusing them. Her voice shook a little at first, but she never once looked away from the judge. She spoke about the emails, the false promises, the ring Daniel never took off. She spoke about learning, only days earlier, that she had never been the only one waiting for a wedding that was never going to happen. Then came dozens of texts, emails, photos, financial records, every piece fitting together like the last corners of a puzzle finally locking into place. Daniel grew quieter with each one, his shoulders sinking lower in his chair. Finally, Linda played the security footage. The courtroom watched in silence as Daniel embraced Emily in our living room, as Judith handed over the envelope marked attorney, as Harold loaded boxes into his truck over several weekends, followed by bank records of the same property transfers. The evidence wasn't loud. It was methodical, and that made it worse. Daniel took the stand. Were these financial decisions made in good faith? His attorney asked. Yes. Did you intend to harm your wife? No. Linda rose for cross-examination, holding up his phone records. Would you explain why you texted Captain Morgan that your parents had safely landed in Seattle, while footage shows all three of you eating takeout in her dining room? The room went silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Daniel looked at his attorney, his parents, then me. He had nowhere left to hide. Judge Watkins recessed until 1:30. Linda and I ate at a diner across the street called the Gin at Nolan Creek. I couldn't taste a bite of it. "How are you holding up?" she asked. I thought I'd feel angry. "I mostly just feel tired." "That's more common than you'd think." I realized then that revenge had quietly stopped being my goal. I didn't need Daniel to suffer. I needed the truth to matter. When court resumed, every seat was filled. Judge Watkins opened her folder. "The court finds overwhelming evidence that Mr. Morgan intentionally concealed marital assets, misrepresented financial information, and transferred jointly owned property in anticipation of divorce." Daniel lowered his head. "The transfer of the Burnett County property to Judith Morgan for $1 is declared a fraudulent conveyance." Judith gasped. "Ownership will revert immediately to the marital estate." Linda squeezed my hand under the table. The ruling continued for 20 minutes, every hidden transaction addressed, every transfer explained. Daniel was ordered to reimburse the missing investment funds, including the cabin renovation money. I was awarded the house in Killeen. Daniel kept his business, but only after a substantial settlement and most of the legal fees, due to his misconduct during discovery. Then Judge Watkins looked at him directly. "Marriage sometimes fails. Dishonesty is what turned this case into something far more serious." No one spoke. Outside, the Texas heat hit like an oven. Daniel hurried off without a word. Judith called after him, he kept walking. Harold lingered, then approached me. "I owe you an apology. I should have stopped this. I told myself it wasn't my business." "It became your business the day you stayed quiet," I said. He nodded, understanding. "I hope you find peace, Harold." "So do I." He walked away. Before we reached the garage, I stopped. "Linda, I'd like to do something. I want to pay off Maria's mortgage." Linda laughed softly. "I had a feeling you'd say that." Maria had spent 10 years taking care of my home. When my world fell apart, she chose courage over comfort. No court order could repay that, but maybe kindness could. My phone buzzed, a text from Maria. "How did everything go?" I typed back 4 words. "The truth won today." 6 months later, I drove back to Austin Airport, the same stretch of Highway 71, the same rolling hills, the same old country songs on the radio. This time I wasn't rushing anywhere, I was picking up my sister Claire, flying in from North Carolina for Thanksgiving. My hands weren't shaking anymore. The airport no longer meant betrayal. It meant survival. Life had settled into a new rhythm. I was still at Fort Cavazos, recently promoted, with a small office overlooking the motor pool. The work kept me busy, the soldiers kept me grounded. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, and after everything, honesty felt like a gift. Maria still worked for me, though we'd both call her family now. The day the divorce became final, I gave her an envelope showing her mortgage paid in full. She cried before finishing reading it. "You spent 10 years taking care of my home," I told her. "You did what a lot of people are too afraid to do. You told the truth." She still brings homemade tamales every Christmas Eve. I still pretend to argue about it. She still ignores me. As for Daniel, I stopped checking on his life, not from forgiveness, but because I no longer needed to know. His financial business lost clients once the divorce went public. The cabin sold. He moved into a small apartment outside Temple. Whether he ever found happiness, I don't know, and for the first time I realized I didn't care. That wasn't bitterness. It was freedom. Once a month, I began volunteering with a support group for military spouses going through divorce. I never pretended to have all the answers, I just told my story. Sometimes we laughed, sometimes we cried, sometimes we sat in comfortable silence. One afternoon a woman stayed behind after the meeting. "How did you stop wanting revenge?" "I didn't," I said. "I just realized revenge wasn't what I really wanted." "What did you want?" "The truth. Once it had a chance to speak for itself, I didn't have to carry the anger anymore." She nodded slowly, and I think she understood. Watching Claire wave both arms across the terminal like she always had since we were kids, I laughed and waved back just as hard. Life wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was peaceful, and that was enough. We drove home with the windows down, talking about nothing important, the kind of easy conversation I thought I'd lost room for. Claire asked how I was really doing. I told her the truth. I was doing well, not because everything had been fixed, but because I'd stopped waiting for someone else's honesty to decide my life. Looking back, I understand something now that I couldn't see that day in the parking lot, when Maria first told me to check the cameras. That video didn't destroy my life. It revealed the truth before even more years could be lost. Sometimes the hardest moments turn out to be the ones that quietly set us free. If you've ever had a moment when the truth changed the direction of your life, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Until next time, take good care of yourself, and never underestimate the quiet strength that comes from choosing honesty over anger.